Welcome to the Triage Method podcast with me, Gary McGowan, Patrick Farrell, and Dr. Nicola Flanagan. We're very glad to be back. Okay, I know you guys don't even know that we had a break, but we had a break from the podcast last week. My comrades were traveling, enjoying themselves. So how were your holidays, guys? Patty, you go first because you're recovered. Nicola, a little bit worse for wear today, I think.
Yeah, not feeling too good, as you can probably tell by my voice, but we'll get through this.
Well, my holiday was great. I've had a week. I went for a few days in Barcelona. It was fantastic, but I've been back working, if you will, for a week since then. So Nicola is the one that's still on holidays, still enjoying freedom while it lasts.
That's it.
Fantastic. So anyway, guys, holidays aside, today we're going to be talking a bit about plant-based diets. And I use that word plant-based diets because that can mean, many different things. There's a spectrum there from, people will call themselves vegans. You've even got the raw vegans and the fruitarians on the really weird end of the internet. But veganism is becoming relatively common now compared to what it would have been. And the same goes for vegetarianism. And then further along the spectrum, you've got pescatarians, lacto-ovo-vegetarians, etc. So there's many different variations of a plant-based diet, some of which can be very easy to implement into one's life. You can still, like me and Patty always say ourselves, that we eat an omnivorous diet. Like, yeah, we eat meat and we eat plants, but the primary basis of our diet is still very much heavy in plants, even though it includes meat. So there's a spectrum there from the carnivore weirdos on the internet to the raw vegan fruitarian weirdos on the internet on both ends of the spectrum. And then the rest of us more normal people somewhere in the middle between there. Okay. So you've got me and Patty maybe who eat a decent amount of meat, I would say, but also eat lots and lots of fruits and vegetables above the average in the population, lots of fiber, etc. Then you've got people further along who maybe they're trying to cut meat out every meal or two, or maybe they only have meat on certain days. And then you've got, people like Nicola, who was previously vegetarian and is now consuming some fish. And then, of course, you've got the harder vegans. So depending on where you are on that spectrum, there needs to be more or less thought put into the constituents of your diet. And to be fair, like, this isn't unique to vegan diets. It applies to all restrictive diets. Like carnivores and keto people always try to come up with excuses as to why they don't need certain nutrients because they're hacking their metabolism in some way. But the reality is that if you're on a carnivore diet, you're still at risk of certain nutrient deficiencies over time as well. So this applies to all restrictive diets. And in particular today, what we want to talk about is how to set up a good, healthful, plant-based diet in a way that is evidence-based and also practical with implementation into your life.
Yeah, and just on this, it's weird that, I don't know, culture goes in these different cycles, where it'll be like different diets are promoted, different diets are demoted, and it can be very hard just you looking back in history and going like, well, what did my grandparents eat? What did they eat? Because like Gary, you mentioned there, like people, skip meat certain meals, certain days, like that's very Catholic. We're all from Ireland. You'd see like, oh, you don't have your meat on Friday, you have fish, and different things like that. And these are all just ways in which the, cultural, we'll call them elites, but like, the people that are ruling, they're like, okay, well, we want to make the population healthier, or we have these beliefs about nutrition. They might not actually be healthy, but they're like, these are our beliefs, And like, for example, we've talked about it before, Gary, because I know you're a fan of St. Augustine, but like in Christianity, you eat the body of Christ. Like you have to eat the body of Christ, that like transubstantiation, that was brought in purely to weed out vegans and vegetarians. Like St. Augustine was from North Africa, as most people know. But he spent time in a Manichaean cult, right? And they were all vegetarians, they were all vegans. And he grew to believe that they were like devil worshippers, right? So he was like, how do we weed out the devil worshippers in Christianity? So he was like, oh, the body of Christ, this wafer, it's not just, a symbol. It is the literal embodiment of Christ. And he did that purely to weed out the vegans, the vegetarians, etc. So it's weird the way that these things go through like they pervade our culture and you're not even aware of what's happening. And this is very relevant to stuff that Nicola's going to talk about here with like documentaries and stuff, because very similar things happen on both sides in terms of, you know, a certain person will have an ideology or they'll have a financial incentive, you know, to be like, oh, this is you know, we should promote this diet. And then you look at like who's funding this and it's like, oh, you own like a huge amount of like pea farms and it would be very beneficial for you to be selling pea protein to vegans and vegetarians. So if you can get more people to be vegans and vegetarians, you know, that would be great for you. So there's all this, you know, background stuff that we don't really even see. And unfortunately, as a health and fitness professional, which, you know, all three of us are here, we kind of are left to pick up the pieces, because you're kind of like actually dealing with the people and they're like, oh, well, I don't know how to do this. You know, I've been told it's good or I've been told it's bad, but how do I actually put that into my actual life, you know? So that's where Nicola comes in and talks us through this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose where this fits into the women's podcast series is around 87% of people doing veganuary were women. And with that, I have a lot of clients that will come to me. They're either trying to reduce meat, they're trying to go vegetarian, vegan, they're not really sure where to start. And the thing is, some of them aren't really sure kind of why they want to do it. So people will become vegan, vegetarian and I'm going to use vegan, vegetarian interchangeably throughout this because they are quite similar. But, you know, you have people that are going vegan, vegetarian for moral, ethical reasons, you know, people for health reasons, for environmental reasons, and we'll talk about each of them. But particularly, I suppose, with the moral, ethical side of things, what's happened is it's become a very, I suppose, emotive diet as well. So we kind of, with the documentaries that we're going to be talking about, it becomes a very emotionally charged topic for a lot of people. And then we kind of lose, I suppose, the health side of things. And, you know, is this a healthful diet? And typically our classical vegan vegetarian diet was one that was primarily like nutrient dense whole foods. But now, I suppose, coming further on, and with in advanced technologies, we have all these new plant-based meats that are completely new to the food chain. And I suppose at the minute, we don't really know what the effect of these substitutions are on ourselves. We might find out eventually that they're not harmful at all, but we definitely can't say for certain that this is, you know, a healthful diet if the effect of the substitution of our standard chicken, fish is, you know, the Beyond Burger or the Linda McCarthy sausages, you know, in Tesco. So we don't know that yet. And I suppose that's where we need to kind of drive the conversation. Like, absolutely, I'm vegetarian for, you know, ethical, moral reasons. But I'm a reluctant vegetarian at that because I don't necessarily stand by the healthfulness of the diet, per se.
Yeah, and this is the thing as well. Like, so, like, you're I would say a relatively well-educated person on the topic, you know, and if you come into that and you go, you're still having conflicts here, you're still going into this going like, oh, I don't know if this is the best thing I should be doing, but, you know, it doesn't align necessarily with my ethics and my morals. You can imagine someone in the general population that's just, if they feel ethically, morally obliged to be like, okay, it's the vegan or, you know, a plant-based diet or whatever, that's what I have to do. And they don't know how, they don't have the education that you have. They don't know how to set that up correctly. They don't know how to, you know, look into this a little bit deeper so that they can actually set it up in a healthful way, because, you know, there definitely are healthier ways, at least, to set up a vegan or a plant-based diet. And there are definitely unhealthy ways to set up a, you know, plant-based diet. And unfortunately, you know, people struggle to set up an omnivorous diet where they're not as restricted in their choices. So if you can imagine you become restricted in your choices, it doesn't make things easier, you know. For some people, for sure, it does. Like, if you have only eaten, I don't know, you know, McDonald's your whole life, that's literally all you've eaten, you know. If you go, oh, I'm just going to switch to a plant-based diet, you know, let's forget about any of the plant-based burgers or anything like that, you know, McDonald's and everything are implementing. But you just go, okay, I'm going to stop eating McDonald's and I'm going to start eating a bit more fruit and veg, you know, even if you just move over to like eating more bread, just, you know, whole grain bread, whatever, you know, you might have profound health benefits from that, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be in your best health. That doesn't mean that's the best diet for you. And this is one of those things you see all the time. Someone will switch from like that standard Western diet or standard American diet. They'll switch to a plant-based diet and they'll go, and I feel great. I feel like I have so much energy. I feel X, Y, and Z health benefits. And you have to look at that and go, yeah, but what you were doing before was, unhealthy. What you were doing before was not contributing to your health. And now you're eating a diet that is in some way contributing to your health. That doesn't mean that that's the best diet for you. And you often see this, which I know like plant-based, what do you want to call them, like zealots. They hate to see it when people are like, oh, I did try a plant-based diet. I got great results off it. And then, in 3 years time, 4 years time, I started introducing more meat and I felt even better, And it's like, okay, yeah, you're moving away from this terrible diet. You got great results with that. You fixed a few health problems that you had or whatever, and then you've introduced some more meat and you fixed one of the issues with a plant-based diet. Well, one of a few issues, which is like, lack of protein, for example. And now all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I've really started putting the puzzle pieces together and I've put myself into a better health position, So I don't know where you want to start with this, Nicola. Maybe go through some of the kind of documentaries and the kind of some of the, not necessarily like documentary by documentary, but the kind of way you see this play out in the real world, because I'm sure lots of plant-based dieters. Again, it is a lot of women that do this, and you have a lot of female clients, and also presume you have a lot of female friends, so you've seen this you've seen this in the real world. So what's the kind of conversation? How does someone start off being plant-based dieter, and how does someone in that kind of circle communicate their thoughts, and what is the media, I suppose, that they're being exposed to?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this has been driven by social media, but not just social media, the documentaries that have come out in recent years as well. And they're a huge talking point, and I suppose the issue when you see that these documentaries is that they throw up a lot of studies and they make you think that what they're saying is true and grounded in science, but really by saying that this or that is in a study, it kind of gives this false sense of authority, and it makes you believe what someone's saying is true. But really what they're doing is they're using a lot of studies that are either fabricated or they're poorly designed. And I suppose this is the issue that I have with a lot of these. Again, I'm a moral, ethical vegetarian, but they're pushing us with the vegan agenda through lies. I don't think that's particularly helpful, and I don't think that that's the right way to push it forward. And you'll hear a lot of the creators being like, we're not telling people to go vegan. We're just giving them the facts. We're just giving them the studies. They can decide. But it's completely fabricated. And like I said, it's just pushing the wrong agenda, and they're the emotiveness and the enthusiasm for the diet just outweighs the science behind it.
Yeah, and it's really weird. Myself and Gary, I must have been 2018, 2019, whenever. Gary stayed in my house for about 6 months in my family home, and we were like 2017, and that was when, was it What the Health came out?
Yeah, we did like a play-by-play.
Yeah, we were like, oh look, this is something that people are talking about, we might as well sit down and watch it, and whatever. We went through it, and I like a lot of history, so I was looking at this through the lens of historical stuff, and I was like, this literally, it just as the Nazi playbook of propaganda. If you got Joseph Goebbels' playbook of propaganda, it's it hit every single point, which is really interesting because Hitler was also a plant-based eater. He was a vegetarian as well. So this is, when I was looking at that, I was like, this does not bode well for the thing. But if you're just a normal person looking at that and going, especially if you've been exposed to some of those, what's that company, PETA or whatever the company is, they show these horrific videos of animal slaughterhouses and stuff. If you're seeing that, and then you see What the Health or one of these other documentaries, and you're kind of like, I don't know, what should I do here? It can be very hard to make educated decisions because emotions are so high in that case. Because I don't think anyone really wants animals to suffer. I'm sure there are psychopaths out there, and usually it is one of those hallmarks of psychotic people where they start injuring animals or killing animals before they go on to start being a serial killer. So it's nobody wants that, but that doesn't mean that these documentaries are good. Doesn't mean that these documentaries are actually putting out a balanced viewpoint to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even, a friend of mine who again is vegan vegetarian, I think she'd kind of slipped up a bit, maybe eating some chicken, whatever it was. And she's, God, I need to go look at some slaughter videos, It's absolutely wild, but that's how people are kind of drilling it into their head. But that's one thing, again, when clients come to me and they're like, I want to eat more plant-based, I want to be more vegan vegetarian. It's like, why? First, let's get down to the, why do you want to do this? How are we going to get there? And kind of what is the quality of your diet now? Is this something that is realistic for you to work towards at the minute? And how can we work towards that?
Yeah, and
I
was just going to say that I think that one of the things as well that's often lost in the Irish, in people that we would know because we're from Ireland, is that like what's missing is that when you're looking at these documentaries, the vast majority of like the horrific practices and the worst cases of like factory farming and meat processing, etc., the vast majority of them are in the US and other countries. Like Irish meat processing, farming practices, etc., are extremely different from those in the US, and even like EU regulatory processes on the use of exogenous antibiotics, hormones, etc., are vastly different. So like when you look at the quality of Irish beef, for example, it's not just the quality of the meat itself, but also the practices that go behind that. So like you're not going to find anywhere in Ireland, not that I'm aware of, one of those absolutely insane thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of factory farms that you're going to see in a lot of those documentaries. And the reason I bring that up is because, I'm from Kerry, and I have a lot of friends who are farmers who have, dairy farms and cattle, etc. And they've been they definitely get affected by that, because everyone that watches those documentaries think that the farmer down the road is complicit in some of those horrific actions, which is just a totally different thing. So you can even make steps towards a more ethical diet by, for example, like you're still obviously causing the death of an animal, but you're doing it in maybe a more humane manner, you might say. If you're buying from, Johnny and Clonakilty, than if you're buying beef in some, state or some massive factory farm in the US. So there's a spectrum there, even at that high level of being a meat eater, that I think is important to remember, particularly given that we're a country that's very much renowned for our agriculture and meat and everything. So,
yeah, and especially in Ireland, like you have some of the best grazing practices, some of the actual best like CO2 sequestration practices as well. And like the Irish government actually just fucks over Irish farmers because they don't count that towards it. Like we literally grow grass like nobody's business, but that's not counted in our CO2 calculations or our carbon emission calculations, which is disgusting. Same with hedgerows. And we also have these like practices that are like basically multi-paddock adaptive grazing strategies, which are unbelievable for the actual soil itself, right? So you actually get more from the cows than just the actual meat, But anyway, we won't get off into a side tangent on that. But in Ireland, it is different. In England, it is different as well than, again, these huge slaughterhouses. Now, can it be better? For sure. We can always, improve on something, But anyway, look, we won't spend too long on the morals or ethics, because that's, it's kind of an individual thing. You have to look at your own, you have to be introspective with that stuff. We can provide you with the facts, but we can't actually make those decisions for you. But you have to actually get the facts. You have to actually be able to decipher the facts, But anyway, look, we'll kind of move on to the next thing, which is, well, first of all, are plant-based diets healthy? This is something that you have to consider. First of all, you've watched a documentary and you go, Jesus, what the fuck, I didn't realize all of this, whatever documentary it is, you're like, Jesus, I need to do something about my diet, right? We'll talk about, maybe transitioning to a plant-based diet, some of the hurdles that you'll find. But the first thing we need to do before we even do that is go, well, is this actually healthy? If you're trying to improve your health, is switching to a plant-based diet a healthy diet? What are your thoughts, Nicola?
Okay, yeah. Well, I suppose despite a lot of studies showing potential benefits, I think we need to look at the overall picture. And I think that's objectively is that it's unconvincing whether vegan diets are more healthful over other healthful dietary patterns that are inclusive of meat. And I suppose bringing that down even further, we need to define what is a healthy diet. So I suppose for everyone, that is a diet that's a nutrient dense diet, mostly whole foods, high in fiber, high in fruit and veg, enough good quality protein, low in saturated fat, etc. And a vegan diet encompasses all of that, but so does a diet that's inclusive of meat. And I think that that's something that we need to understand kind of first and foremost, and that it's not, these are diets of exclusion. So we need to look at the effect of what we are including into the diet before we can say that vegan diets are healthy. It's looking at the diet of the whole and the diet of the individual before we can say a blanket, this is a healthy diet.
Yeah, like I always ask questions like, compared to what? Like, oh, you're eating a plant-based diet and you think that's healthy. Compared to what? Like, if you compare it to the standard American diet, I'd say eating shit off the street would probably be better, So it's like, compared to what? Like, what are we actually comparing this to? And then you start, dialing that in and going, okay, so if someone eats, a load of red meat from fast food outlets, like, that's not going to be a healthful diet. That's not going to be a healthful, population, compared to someone that's a plant-based diet. You always do that. What's that religious group in America? Is it the Seventh-day Adventists? Who is it? Mormons? I can't remember. But anyway,
the Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah, they basically just eat like a relatively plant-based diet, and they have good health. So everyone goes, oh, like, clearly the diet, it's associated with good health. But they also do all these other practices that are health promoting practices. They have good community. They literally are like, go to sleep early, do all the stuff that's like, we know these are good health promoting practices. So you can't pin it squarely on the diet. And it's the same when you talk about like, poorer diets or bad diets. It's like, yeah, but what are the other practices? What's the whole that we're looking at here? Like, oh, these people that eat, fast food and stuff, you're not going to be like, these are people that have a lot of time to be thinking about their health. They're a lot of like, health conscious people. And they usually call this like the healthy user bias when they're looking at different diets. But it's very hard, again, as an individual to understand all this stuff. You read some research and you don't have that wider picture, that wider body of the research, because you're only reading one paper. You don't have time to sit down for 40 hours and read through all of these different papers and go, oh, this is the actual issue at hand here, and these are the benefits and the pros and the cons and whatever else, But having said that, I would consider, if a well-planned vegan or plant-based diet in general, I would consider it quite healthy. If we're moving away from that standard American diet, that standard Western diet, whatever you want to call it, if you're talking about gradations of health, if we move away from that standard Western diet to a plant-based diet, even if you do a relatively poorly planned plant-based diet, I would probably say you'd get better health. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're following a vegan diet that's high in minimally processed foods, if you're eating your tofu, your tempeh, your seitan, that's going full of, like vegetables and fruits, that's going to be a really good diet. But not all vegan diets are created equal. And I suppose that's where it comes down to. But overall, again, if you're following a minimally processed diet, that's going to be, a really good diet to follow, like fact, But again, we just need to look at the effect of the substitution. And again, that's something that I discuss with clients. Okay, what are we gonna replace this with? Well, what are we gonna replace your chicken with? Are we replacing this with a Beyond Meat burger? Or are we replacing this maybe with tofu and tempeh, or lentils in the same meal? Like what are we going for here?
And this is one of those things, like I say it all the time to people that are thinking about transitioning to a more plant-based diet. It's like, do you know how to eat that way? That sounds really kind of like, I don't know, condescending. It's like, do you even know how to eat that way? But like, truly, do you know how to cook these foods? Like, if I said to Gary, I need you to just cook up some tempeh there, you'd be like, what? Like, okay, like, where do you get tempeh in a Tesco or wherever? What shop? Do you know where to get that, Gary? You'd be like, I don't know where it is in the shop. Like, so there's all these little things that you don't necessarily think of initially with the diet, that you're like, okay, I actually have to change an entire, set of processes, a set of beliefs, set of, day-to-day living that I do to actually do this, and a lot of, plant-based dieters, as they transition, they do struggle with that. At least I found that in my experience with, clients that have even moved more towards a plant-based diet. Like, they might only have, meat at the evening meal. They might be like, right, for the rest of the meal is going to be more plant-based. And like you said there, Nicola, it's one of those things where you're going, okay, we know, and we'll touch on them in a second, we know there are some nutrients that are harder to get with a plant-based diet, right? So what are you going to do to solve that? Do you have an idea? Do you have a plan? And I often ask my clients that, even though, like, I'm there to help them with the plan, I want to know what they know right away, what they're thinking straight away, because that actually is really informative, and it's something that you can do yourself. And going, especially as we go through this and go, okay, like, say for example, everyone knows protein is a harder nutrient for plant-based eaters to get, in general, right? It's one that they traditionally struggle with. So if you're transitioning to a plant-based diet, where are you going to get protein? Well, how are you going to reach your protein requirements? A lot of plant-based dieters, what they do is they bury their head in the sand and they go, oh, protein just isn't that important. Like, you'll see this all over the internet, all over social media. Oh, actually, I don't need to focus on that as much because it's just not that important. That's a meat propaganda or whatever, and it's like, no, you can't just move the goalposts. You can't just change the goalposts. Like, you see this again, we talked about it before with, like, carnivore dieters, where they're like, oh, it doesn't matter that my testosterone is like 200 nanograms per deciliter or whatever. It's literally in the fucking toilet, and my SHBG is, as high as the reference range will even go, and beyond. And it's like, they're like, oh, but it's fine because, because I'm not eating as much carbs or whatever. And they make up all these, like, mechanistic hypotheses and go, oh, it's because of that, it's fine. It's like, you don't just get to move the goalposts. Oh, so for everyone else, the goalposts are here, but for you, oh, we can change them, it's fine. And you see this again with, like, Gary always talks about, like, all these, like, huge LDL spikes, and they're on this, like, ketogenic or carnivore diet, and you're like, you can't just move the goalposts because you like this way of eating, so we can't do that with, a plant-based diet either. We have to go, okay, these are the general things that we agree on for health, right? We can maybe modify them slightly, but not this huge shift. So if we know protein is important, where are you going to get that in the diet? How are you going to solve that issue? Right? And this is again where we really have to dig into the practical stuff of, okay, this is an issue that, plant-based dieters have. How are we going to solve it? What are our tools in the toolbox here? Oh, we have these food sources. Do you know where to get them? Do you know how to cook them? You don't? Okay, then before we even transition, you need to get educated on, how do I cook these meals? How do I actually shop for this stuff? Do I need to go to specialty stores? Do I need to do X, Y, Z? We need to do that before we transition. And unfortunately, a lot of people, they transition and they fall into a pattern of that standard Western plant-based diet, where it's like, oh yeah, it's a plant-based diet, but the only plants that people eat are bread. It's like, that's the closest to a plant someone gets. They're literally like, oh, I eat toast in the morning, and then I eat, some sort of bread product in the afternoon, maybe some biscuits, like that kind of stuff. It's just not a well thought out diet. It's not a well planned diet. And unfortunately, those people are probably not getting health benefits even switching from that standard Western diet, the standard American diet, So how do we kind of solve that problem? And what do you see that as the kind of transition that often happens in the general public? Like, obviously it doesn't happen with the people that we're coaching because we're helping them with it, but in the general public, when you see someone transition to a plant-based diet or a lower meat diet, what mistakes do you see they make? What issues do you see crop up for them?
Yeah, so first and foremost is protein. And even for women who aren't looking to go vegan, vegetarian, I do find that the protein intake is a little bit lower. And even for the general population, like, we want the recommendations to be a little bit higher, even as we get older, for, our muscles, our bones, as we age, and we need, a slightly higher protein intake than we're having. And particularly for us in the fitness industry, we are looking for that higher range. Obviously, we're trying to look for muscle growth and recovery in the gym. So protein is the first thing that I'll tackle. we need to compare animal protein and plant protein. So animal protein is a more complete source of protein. It has all your essential amino acids. It's more easily absorbed in the body. Whereas plant protein, it's an incomplete source of essential amino acids. So you need a range, I suppose, of different plant protein sources to make up that full complement, to have that kind of full spectrum of amino acids. And then adding another layer onto that, again, this is more important in the fitness industry, where we focus on it more, I suppose, is the leucine content of these protein sources. So again, animal-based foods are generally higher in leucine, which is kind of, I suppose, the switch to trigger muscle protein synthesis, as we know. And plant-based foods are generally that little bit lower. So again, that's another layer, that it's not the first thing that I'll say to a client. They'll be like, what the hell is leucine? So first and foremost, we just look at trying to get that protein intake a little bit higher. So with animal foods, it's quite easy. We're trying to get, an animal source of protein at every meal. For plant-based proteins, to try and get that full spectrum in at meals, to try and hit that kind of leucine threshold. What I say is generally you have kind of two sources of a plant-based protein. So with that, you're trying to ensure, again, that full spectrum of the amino acids is there, and the leucine content will be a little bit higher. And what's important about this as well is what I find when people are transitioning away from a diet that's inclusive of meat, is they're kind of missing that centerpiece of the meal. And I think particularly in Ireland, we grew up with, having the steak or the chicken, and that was the main part of the meal. So once you take that away, what are you replacing it with? So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at maybe 1 to 2 sources of plant protein at every meal. And we're looking for really, for meat eaters, you're looking at 20-25 grams per meal, but for plant-based, you're looking for a little bit higher. And again, that's just looking for the full complement of amino acids. So that's first and foremost what we'll be looking at. We need to look at cooking methods then. So do you know how to cook tofu, tempeh, seitan, edamame? Do you know where to buy them? So for a lot of people, you're shopping in Tesco, Lidl, and you can absolutely get these stuff in there. And there's been a much wider range in recent years of this kind of stuff. But if you go to Asian markets in town or whatever, you can get literally things that are triple the size for like a quarter of the price. So it's little things like that, because I know one of the biggest things that I hear is like, I can't afford that tiny block of tofu in Tesco, when a big thing of chicken is the same price. So that's another thing to consider, is do you know where to buy this stuff? And then do you know how to cook it? What ways do you enjoy cooking it? Do you prefer softer tofu? Do you prefer firmer tofu? So it's about shopping around for that sort of stuff as well.
This is one of those things as well that traditionally, especially, women have always been you look after the family as well, the family food, you're doing the evening cooking. And if you're in a position where you're like, I kind of want to, at least personally, move towards a more plant-based diet, how do you then transition the rest of the family? Or are you leaving the rest of the family? Like, are they saying the same? Or are you transitioning your meals to like, you're making a bolognese type dish, and you're like, okay, before I put in the meatballs, I'm going to take my portion out and the rest of the family can have the meatballs or the mince or whatever it is, whatever you're doing. You're like, okay, this is like you have to think of those things. And then you have to think, okay, well, how am I going to get my protein into that meal as well? Obviously a lot of that has changed in recent years. Well, at least in my experience, like guys do a lot more cooking. It's not just the women that are left to, look after the family. But regardless, if you are the primary person looking after the family food, this is still stuff that you have to be thinking about. You still have to be thinking, well, okay, if I'm transitioning to this, are the family transitioning to this? Is this something that just affects me? Or is it something that I'm going to have to now cook separate meals entirely, And it's all these little practical things that you have to think of, because again, if you don't think of these, the other thing that happens is you go, oh, well, I cooked the meal for the family and they had the meat and potatoes and whatever else. And you go, oh, like, I didn't want to eat that because, I didn't have the centerpiece, the meat there. So all I had instead was, a bowl of cereal or something. It's like, you're not eating well as a result of looking after your family, but because you've no plan, you've no practical, like, this is how I'm going to solve these issues, unfortunately you then don't solve those issues, and one of those things you said on the expense of it as well, like, this is one of those things where, like, the vast majority of people have figured out, oh, there's different ways to shop around to get better deals. Like, people will be like, oh, I buy my meat here and I get my veg here and whatever. Like, they'll go to 2 or 3 different shops because they're like, this is actually a overall cheaper way to live. Especially like myself and Gary, we come from like lower socioeconomic status areas. So you'll be like, oh, people are definitely shopping around to, like, oh, go to a Lidl or go to an Aldi or whatever, because you can't go down to, I don't know, Marks and Spencer's and go, oh, I'll just get all this, high quality, high grade food. Be like, oh, that's a nice treat every now and again. But unfortunately, it's not the weekly or the daily shop, So what has to happen then is you have to plan this stuff out, but then also you don't have necessarily a guide to help you, Like, if you're talking to all the other people in your community, in your area, and they're like, oh yeah, like Lidl has a deal on, their whatever it is, their 5 veg or whatever they do, it's like they have a deal on this thing. You're like, oh, cool, we can get that, blah, blah, blah. You see all these things. And if you're a plant-based dieter, you're not getting that insider info. You're not getting that, oh, Mary down the road said that there's a deal on over here, or, whatever it is, you're not getting as much of that information. So that means that there's an extra onus on you to now have to really shop around, really be looking for those deals, really be looking for, okay, well, how can I save money? And like you said, oftentimes, especially with protein sources, Asian markets are great for this stuff, but that might involve now, oh, well, that means that you have to travel into town, for example, once a week, it's like, that's something that you have to consider now, to add into the cost, the time, effort, etc. And this is stuff that people just don't think about when they initially transition, because, like, how would you know to think about this stuff, So you have to really put this stuff in place if you were trying to make this a successful way of eating, a way of life. And unfortunately, what often happens is people don't. They just stick to that, like, I'll just have the bread, the pasta, I won't have a protein source with this, And this is also one of the reasons that, plant-based dieters find it so hard to eat enough protein, because it requires more thought. Like, it requires a lot of thought to set up a well-planned omnivorous diet. It requires even more thought to set up a well-planned out, like, plant-based diet, And if you're not willing to put in that thought, you're not going to get the results that you want,
Yeah, and let me just say one thing on that as well, is like the difference between efficacy and effectiveness is something that's often talked about in research more broadly. So, for example, you might say that a plant-based diet is very efficacious in the sense that if done correctly, perfectly, it can have great outcomes. However, whether or not something is actually effective depends on what happens when you take that intervention in a sterile setting, for example, in a metabolic ward with all meals provided, and you put that out in the real world and you say, right, everyone do this. Then you have to observe what happens. And the effectiveness of the recommended intervention, for example, let's say, construct a well-planned vegan diet. Here are your protein options, tofu, seitan, etc. Here's how much fiber you should get, and so on. If you take all of that advice and you apply it to the population, the impact that that's going to have on, let's say, 20 to 30-year-old females versus 20 to 30-year-old males versus 70 to 80-year-old males, there's going to be massively, different effects there. Like, if I went down to my granda now and I asked him, have you ever had tofu, or granda, would you know how to cook a stir fry with seitan or whatever? He's going, what? Well, excuse me? What are you talking about? So this kind of dream that we can apply a healthful diet to the whole population by just telling people what to do, it's very much a dream. And I think you have to consider the cultural context and also the population of interest when you're thinking about applying this type of intervention. Because, like, personally, even for me now, like, I'm familiar with how to construct a plant-based diet. I'm familiar with some of the protein sources, but, like, taste preference aside, I would find it really difficult to make that transition because I'm quite time poor, and, like, learning how to cook these things, I have zero interest in that. Like, when I cook meals, it's about efficiency. I'm trying to get it done as quickly as possible. And if I was to start experimenting with tofu and seitan and these types of things, like it's just not for me, right now. And that's important to consider, because there are a lot of people who are time poor, who even the friction of having to go to different stores to change their standard shopping routine, to learn new methods of cooking, and to prepare meals from scratch all the time. There's a lot of friction there, and that even goes for when people are eating out at the moment. Because, for example, if I'm in a rush and I haven't eaten, like my go-to is to get my protein in is I'll grab like a protein bar in the shop, or I'll grab maybe a packet of pre-prepared meat or something like that with whatever else. And that just allows me to get my protein in on the go. And we're lucky enough that right now there are plant-based protein bars that you can pick up. Generally, they're probably a little bit less palatable still, but they've improved a lot. But that's not the case for everyone. If you go to Super Value here in Carrigaline, or you go to Super Value in Cork City, and then you go to Super Value up in Knocknaheeny, which is a very poverty-stricken area in Cork compared to a lot of other areas. The contents of those stores are vastly different, and that's something I don't think a lot of people appreciate, is that telling someone in a low socioeconomic status area to try to go and buy all these foods, like they literally mightn't even be sold. Like you go to these shops, there's less fruits and vegetables, there's less of a range of selection of fresh fruits and vegetables. You're not going to have that, that section that's in all Super Values with like all the health foods and all the protein bars. That's not there in Knocknaheeny because there's not a market for it. So considering those things is really, really important, because it's very easy to get into our own bubbles and think that everyone has the same resources and everyone has the same interest in making their diet such a core part of their life. But that's just not reality. Most people eat something that's quick, relatively tasty, and isn't too bad for their health. Like that's the extent of the vast majority of people's decision making. And a lot of people who are on more niche diets like vegan diets or carnivore diets or keto diets or whatever, by definition, like there's a selection bias there, and that those people have a clear expressed interest in making their diet one part of their identity and two a big part of their life. So that's just not the vast majority of the population. So that's my 2 cents there. Just really, really keep that in mind, because that also applies to everyone who talks about calorie tracking and everyone who talks about meal planning. Like that's not the reality for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, like it's weird, because obviously I grew up in Dublin, so Dublin is probably the most I say progressive, but not in terms of like left-wingism or whatever, but like progressive in terms of your access to different types of food, variety of food. Like you go to Dublin, versus Kerry, you're gonna you have all these different protein bars, you have all these different things, because Dublin has a huge market for all of these different things, Whereas like I've moved from Dublin, so we'll say that's the pinnacle of availability, obviously different areas within there, but the pinnacle of availability in Ireland, right? To London, which you would presume is the pinnacle of availability in England. But the difference even there, like you don't have the same selection of like protein bars. Now that makes sense because the dairy industry in Ireland is huge, so they obviously want to make as much products from that. But you don't have the same selection of protein bars. Now you can go into certain shops and stuff, but it's not just in your average everyday Tesco. Like, yeah, they do have the protein bars on a little like rack, but some, literally whatever, like petrol stations or whatever in Ireland, just a random little small petrol station would have far bigger selection of protein bars and different things than, just your averagely stocked Tesco or whatever over here.
Yeah.
So it's different. And Ireland and England are relatively similar. Like we're all in that Atlantic archipelago, very similar cultures. Don't ever, say that to an Irish person, but relatively similar cultures and stuff. And you can already see there's a difference here in terms of availability and access, And I literally, as I said, like was in Barcelona a week ago or whatever, and like I saw maybe 2 protein bars over there, just in your average everyday shop, But if I go over there, you're seeing all this availability of like fresh fruits and, really colorful, like nice fruits, really nice meats, like Iberian ham, Iberian pork, like delicious, but like it's not the same as what we have over here, So you can imagine across the world, there's just different availability, different access. And if you've never experienced that, you've never traveled outside of your own little bubble, like you're not going to know what that's like. And you see this all the time in terms of, you'll see someone from, I don't know, Los Angeles or whatever in America, someone in California recommending, oh, this is how people should eat a plant-based diet and whatever. And it's like, yeah, because you have a larger community of people over there that are eating in a similar way. So you have a much greater ability to eat like that, you know? And like there are some like vegan and plant-based restaurants over here in London, you know, and I think there are some in Dublin as well, but I couldn't imagine there's one in Kerry, you know? Like there
No,
might be.
that's what I was just thinking, is that like even like if you put like the plant-based things aside, like even if you think of maybe restaurants that would be like ridiculously common in Cork or Dublin, like let's say burrito places, right? You got Boojum, Tolteca, Burrito Blues, Zambrero. Like there's literally tens of them that you could choose from in Dublin, all of them relatively decent. And they're probably a type of fast food that we consider to be more on the healthy spectrum. Like if me and you were going for food patty, we generally get a burrito. And I would do the same in Cork. If I wanted a meal, I'd get a burrito. There's not a single burrito place in Kerry, the whole county of Kerry. There's not one burrito place. You can get it, like there's Mexican restaurants where you can get one to sit down, but like there's no Boojum, there's no Tolteca, there's absolutely none of that. It just doesn't exist. And if I was to get a takeaway in Killarney when I'm home, and Killarney now considers a fairly built up area of Kerry in comparison, and a lot more modern. You know, I can't really think of anywhere that I would go to get a healthy takeaway, so to speak. Like it just doesn't really exist. Like you've got Chippers, you've got 4 Star, you've got Domino's, you've got McDonald's. There's not even a Burger King anymore, that closed. So there's very limited options. Whereas if you're in, like you say, somewhere in California, or you're, you know, in the US in particular, but even in like London and stuff, depending on the area of London, of course, you're going to have such a wide range of options that you could potentially choose from, whether it be plant-based or it be a more health-focused type of diet. I found this fascinating as well. Like this week in the UK, like you've probably all seen the uproar about calorie labels on menus and that type of thing. And it just seemed like such a first world problem that everyone was arguing about. We're arguing about whether or not nutrition information should be available in these restaurants that we all eat out at regularly. It just seems so absurd to me. But yeah, we're going to keep talking about this if we don't move on. But basically the point is, there's vastly different access to these types of restaurants, types of foods, easily accessible foods, depending on where you live, both internationally and regionally within countries. So keep it in mind.
Yeah, I think that the organizational thing is important as well, though. I think being vegan, vegetarian, you have to be more organized. And like you said, you do have to have more time. And like I said, it's only since January that I started eating fish again. And that was, again, purely out of convenience, mostly. You know, I didn't have a lot of time when I was a student, but now, like, I moved from Dublin to Waterford. I started working full time and doing work for Triage. And what it's meant for me is, instead of coming home and like I have nothing in the house, you know, and having like a bagel, meant I can come home and have like a piece of salmon and maybe a bit of broccoli that takes like 20 minutes, you know, instead of trying to like marinate tofu or, you know, like it's made a huge difference, you know, in my life, in terms of time and in terms of, I suppose, quality of food. So
and in terms of murdering fish,
and in terms of slaughtering the salmon population in Ireland.
You're a scumbag.
Yeah. Anyway, but yes, no, I completely agree. I think the organizational aspect is really important. Like on my other screen here on my computer, I've got a NutriQuick pulled up because I'm trying to, you know, order some meals because I'm time poor. And again, like what a luxury to be able to, you know, have access to that service. But again, it goes back to the point that even on my omnivorous diet, it's sometimes like food prep is something that is just, I just don't have that much time for it. So getting something else is really helpful. So I do think that's important. And I think that even if you're someone that is, you know, coming at it from like, let's say you have a health concern, but you also have an ethical or moral concerns, you can start by making those small steps. And I find that, like, it depends on what area of the internet you are, because I like to observe these trends. And in some areas of like vegan Twitter, plant-based dieters and stuff like that, it's very much all or nothing. That if someone cheats on their vegan diet, you know, they eat a bit of meat every now and then, it's like morally reprehensible, and they feel an extreme amount of guilt for that. And maybe that's right. I don't know, but I think that makes it very difficult for people, that they feel they have to take such a massive leap rather than just taking these small steps to improving their diet over time. And I think you can consider your journey, so to speak, towards a plant-based diet to be something that you take over a number of years. Like maybe you are in that position where you're a student now, or you're a busy junior doctor who doesn't have much time, and you're saying to yourself, you know what, I'm going to reduce my meat intake slightly and increase the amount of plants that I eat. But to be honest, right now, it's not time for me to fully dive in. So maybe when I have a bit more money, a bit more time, etc., in a couple of years, I'll take another step, and then another step, and then I'll try to make that sustainable by the time that, you know, I have a family and everything, so that I know how to cook these meals. I can pass these lessons on to my kids, etc. So rather than just being all or nothing, and we say this in relation to any diet, you know, dip your toes in and take small steps. And I think that's probably the best way if you're going to make that leap.
Absolutely.
100%. So controversial one. What are your thoughts on plant-based meats, right? Do you think that's a way we could solve this issue? Do you think that's a way the industry is going to solve this? You know, you're saying, oh, I'm time poor. Would it be, you know, handy enough for you to just come home and go, oh, I have, you know, a plant-based burger in my freezer here. Let me just defrost that. Boom. There we go. Or like, you know, seitan nuggets, seitan chicken nuggets, like they are fucking delicious. Now they are twice the cost of chicken nuggets, or at least for the same cost.
Where did you get them? Sorry to interrupt you. Where did you get them? Do you like buy them and cook them yourself, or in a restaurant?
Just Tesco, you know.
Ah, interesting. I might give them a shot.
No, but anyway, look, they're about twice the cost. They're about twice the cost for the same amount.
Okay.
So you're getting whatever 36 chicken nuggets, and you're getting 20 seitan nuggets, you know. But regardless, you know, is this how it's going to be solved? Is this what's going to happen? We're going to have an industry where, you know, we just come up with all these different plant-based foods. We just come up with all these different meat substitutes, and that's it. That's how it's going to be solved. Because I know, like, well, there is a difference in terms of, okay, we're having a, you know, Linda McCartney sausage, right? Or we're having a, you know, Beyond Burger, you know, and it's like, there's gradations here. But what are your thoughts, Nicola, as someone who has been a plant-based eater? What are your thoughts in terms of, would that be the thing that would allow you to eat a healthier diet, allow you to eat a, you know, at least solve the protein component of the diet, and especially with the, you know, the time aspects, etc. Now, obviously, look, again, it is a privilege because a lot of these things are more expensive, but let's assume that the cost isn't the issue here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is the thing, and another reason why I went back to eating fish, because I felt like I had a huge over reliance on these kind of foods. You know, I was coming home and, you know, having the sausages or the burgers, and I was like, what's the difference between eating this and eating a normal burger or a normal sausage? And I think, you know, we kind of, what's been good about these foods is that it's made eating vegetarian or vegan more accessible. It means that vegans, vegetarians can, you know, go to a barbecue and still not have to, you know, eat nothing. So it's made it more an accessible diet in that sort of a way. But again, you know, I think they can be, you know, deceiving, I suppose, in one way, because we make the presumption that something's labeled vegan or vegetarian, that this is a healthful thing to eat. But what it's doing is it's just excluded, you know, the meat, like what is included in these meals. And one that I, you know, always bring it back to is, you all know, the corn products like mycoprotein. So it's fungal derived, and generally it's quite a good source of protein. It's a complete source of protein. It has fiber, vitamins, minerals, and
it tastes good. Don't forget that.
It tastes really good as well. And there's you know, kind of studies coming out now, and it's comparing you know, the mycoprotein to milk protein and muscle protein synthesis, and it's showing, you know, I suppose early on that it is looking like it's having a similar benefit. It's still probably one rung below meat products, but then you have to compare the corn products in itself. So let's say you take the mince, for example, that's like 90% mycoprotein, which is fantastic. But then you look at like the corn nuggets, which are actually like 30% microprotein, you know, so the other like 70%, like what is that composed of? It's composed of like the batter, it's composed of additives. So again, just because something is, you know, a meat substitute, again, what is the effect of the substitution? Like what actually is in that? And like I said before, like these are all kind of, you know, kind of newly like highly engineered food products that are kind of new to the food chain. So we don't know their effect long term yet. And again, they might not be harmful at all, but we can't say that for sure yet. But I think just because something is exclusive of meat doesn't necessarily mean, doesn't guarantee a health improvement, I suppose. But again, like I said, one of the reasons why I switched back to eating fish was because I was over reliant on these foods. I still do think these foods are fantastic, and you know, can be included in a diet, but it's when you are substituting in, you know, the sausages at every meal or the burgers at every meal. I think it's the Beyond Burger in America. It has like the same amount of like calories, protein, saturated fat as like you know, a McDonald's burger. So
Yeah, and this is one of those things, regardless of, you know, whether you use one of these, you know, engineered meats or whatever, like when you're trying to solve the protein issue for a plant-based dieter, you run into a lot of issues. And one of those issues is, well, what else is coming with that protein? You know, like you said, okay, we've got this, you know, corn mince or whatever, right? And it's like, okay, we've got this, you know, it's microproteins, it's 90+%, you know, mushrooms or whatever. It's like, okay, cool, we have that. So we can kind of get an idea of, okay, that's the protein source, relatively lean protein source, fantastic. But then we look at other ones, and like you said, with the microprotein nuggets or whatever, you're like, okay, this is only 30% here, right? Or you look at even just, you know, whole foods. You go for, okay, well, what's a whole food, like high protein, you know, plant-based food source? And you're like, okay, cool, pick whatever it is. And then you have to go, okay, well, that actually comes with 30 grams of carbs for the 30 grams of protein, you know, or it comes with some fat, or it comes with, you know, something else. Or it's like, to get the 30 grams, I have to eat like 2 kilos of this stuff, you know. It's like, you have to think about all of that stuff when you're trying to actually solve this protein issue, right? So it's like, what else comes with it, and how much of this do I actually need to eat in terms of like the physical quantity? And this is just something that it takes a lot of time to really dial in on what works for you, because you see people try to solve this online in terms of like give recommendations, and they'll be like, oh, do this and do this, but they're not helpful for the individual. Like, you know, I might be like, oh, well, I really like, you know, red meat, and I eat more red meat than I eat chicken. And if all I find online is like, oh, everyone should eat chicken, it's like, it's not really solving the problem for me. I still need to get, you know, information for me, which is not as readily available for you, because again, plant-based dieter, you're a niche in the whole, you know, microcosm of the possible diets, you know.
yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, look, protein is the be all and end all, or sorry, protein isn't the be all and end all for, you know, what could potentially go wrong, or potentially we need to look at with a plant-based diet. Now, before we go on to just touching on some of the other nutrients of concern, because we did touch on this in the last podcast, so we're not going to spend too much time on this, and I, you know, probably just going to run through this in a more practical way and just go like, these are the kind of foods you want to be looking at. I do want you to keep in mind that, first of all, you still have to do the same thing here. You have to go, okay, I have to solve, like, the next one we're going to touch on is just omega-3s, right? And you go, okay, if I have to solve this issue, what other nutrients are coming along with this, you know? Or if we're touching on iron or calcium or whatever, you're like, okay, I'm eating this food to solve this issue, but what other nutrients are coming along with this? And this is something that is really hard for plant-based dieters that are trying to change their body composition, right? Like, you might be doing something like tracking your calories and macros because you want to know, oh, am I, you know, on track with my calories? Am I getting enough protein? Whatever, right? And you then try to solve the protein issue, for example, and now all of a sudden your calories are way off where you want them to be. So we have to look into that, because I know a lot of people listening to this, they do track their calories, they do track their macros, are generally a little bit, you know, more involved in their diet. They're more tracking the specifics of it. So when we're solving all these different issues, we still have to take into account that, okay, well, how does this fit into the actual diet paradigm that we're using? You know, are we just going to go, okay, cool, that solves my iron requirements, and now my fat is up, like I'm using dark chocolate or something to solve my iron requirements, which probably isn't the best way to do it. But now your fat intake is, massive. Now obviously, like dark chocolate, if you're a vegan, you're probably not eating that. But just taking that as an example, so we have to think about that stuff. But before we move on and move away from protein, do you have anything else to say on protein intake? Any practical recommendations? Anything at all? Either of you?
No, again, I think it's just about, like, again, I have one client in particular who I'm working with. She wants to work more towards a plant-based diet for environmental reasons, which I know, Patty, that's your top reason for going vegan as well.
That's the worst reason for
but anyways, so she wants to move more towards it for that reason. So I mean, she's mostly substituting with mycoprotein. So again, what we're trying to do at this stage is just sit down, okay, like where are we currently getting our protein in our meals? And so we're just say substituting one meal with mycoprotein. She's going to be, learning how to cook tofu. And again, the first step is, she was like, this is going to be kind of expensive. It's still something that I want to work towards. I still want to also work towards my goals of trying to hit my protein intake. So it's just about finding, cheaply sourced meat substitutes. And we have to remember that, like, we've grown up, cooking a certain way. We've grown up cooking, the same kind of meals, I suppose, as our parents. So you are, retraining yourself to cook, to shop in a different way. So it is just about taking it slowly and actually just sitting down and kind of mapping out your meals. Where do I currently get my protein? Okay, what substitutes, what switches can I make to still have the same intake as before? Do I know how to cook these meals? Do I enjoy eating these meals? So that's the first step. But I think a combination is really good. So whether you're having, tempeh and some bean source, that'll also cover like a good carb source. I think mixing in the protein sources in the same meal is a good start.
100%. Gary, do you have anything to say in terms of practical plant-based recommendations?
No, sir.
I didn't think so. So maybe we'll just move on to those other nutrients of concern. I don't know, Nicola, do you want to run through these? Because obviously, look, you have more practical experience with this as well. So you could be like, look, this is what's generally recommended, but these are the issues that you run into.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of key ones, I suppose, when you're going vegan, vegetarian, and the first one definitely being B12. This is mostly important for people that are vegan, not so much vegetarian, because you can get it from your milk and other animal products. But so B12, you can get it from nutritional yeast. It's definitely not something you want to be deficient in, for kind of your red blood cells, for your nervous system. But even supplementing, like I said, with nutritional yeast is a really good form of B12 that a lot of people would use.
And practically speaking, what would that look like? Are you adding that to meals? Are you taking it in capsules? Or like, what's the story?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, nutritional yeast. Yeah, so you can get, it's like a powder that you can get in most health food stores, and it has kind of a cheesy taste to it. So people, if they're making maybe like scrambled tofu, might add it into that, and then that would kind of have your kind of cheesy base for a meal.
Yeah, and I find a lot of people add it into sauces if they're like, oh, I just want to get it in and I just don't want to have to think about it. They'll add it, like maybe they're having like a tomato sauce or something. It gives it that little bit of a cheddary taste, but it's still like, it's kind of just masked and it's just looked after. They don't have to think about it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other nutrients of concern then after the B12?
Yeah, so our omegas are another one, but funnily enough, I would find that this is a huge one for people who eat meat as well. Like a lot of people don't really actually eat a lot of fish. So Gary, not looking at you. But yeah, so a lot of people wouldn't have this anyway. So even for a lot of clients who do eat meat, but won't eat fish, it's still something that I might be saying maybe you should consider supplementing with this. So in terms of a vegan, vegetarian, so we're mostly looking at our DHA and our EPA for our essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, and then ALA is our plant sources, and that can be converted to the DHA and the EPA, but it's not a very good conversion. There's not a high rate of conversion, but getting this through your diet, and you're looking at like your like ground linseeds, you like your rapeseed oil. Again, you're looking at supplementing with microalgae, and that'll get you kind of your DHA and your EPA. But yeah, mostly switching to rapeseed oil, ground linseeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, incorporating all of them. Again, then you run into issues with people maybe who are trying to, cut calories, and suddenly they're trying to add in a whole load of chia seeds, hemp seeds that again just do bump up someone's calorie intake. So you do need to look at the overall picture, like what is our primary concern here? Is it calorie intake? Is it getting this in? Maybe I need to supplement, and then when I'm back up to my maintenance calories, then maybe I can start chucking in chia seeds and that sort of thing.
Yeah, like practically speaking, any like the plant-based dieters that I've coached, we just go for an algae oil. It's just easiest way to do it. Now we do still try to work on, okay, can we switch out any of these foods? Can we use like you said, like different types of oils, or maybe we can add some nuts or seeds, just to help from a diet perspective. But practically speaking, if we are also trying to manipulate body composition in any way, like it's very hard to do all of that stuff, get your omega-3 requirements when we're trying to potentially like restrict the amount of fat that you're eating. If we're like, oh, you have to add in these seeds and these nuts, and then all of a sudden you're getting in 20 grams of fat from like seeds and nuts, you're like, okay, well, this is going to make the rest of the diet harder, because now I don't have that buffer for other sources of food.
Yeah.
So practically speaking, I just go, okay, look, get an algae oil. It's the easiest way to do it. Now, we are generally of a food first mentality, but in this case, I'm kind of like, look, it's unless you're going to go out there and eat fish, an algae oil is just the easiest way to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same goes for a lot of meat eaters as well, who just won't eat fish. So I'm gonna say same.
Yeah. And any other nutrients of concern? Because I know, like, we touched on a lot of them in the last one. I know we have like iron, calcium, we have iodine. We did spend a lot of time on iodine in the last one. We do also have other ones like creatine, zinc, choline, folate. Like we could spend so long on each individual ones, but practically speaking, what are the ones that you find are like, these are something that we can really easily solve with just a few diet manipulations, or if you're like, this is something that we should definitely look into?
Yeah, so I think creatine actually, is a big one. And, vegans, vegetarians do have, I suppose, reduced muscle creatine stores. So creatine, again, particularly for us that are looking at sports performance, more creatine stores will have an increase in not only sports performance, but cognition, power output. And then in terms of healthy aging as well, I suppose that is the potential to, increase muscle mass or even maintain it. So it is something, again, that it's not something that immediately when someone starts with me, I'll recommend supplementing with, because they're like, what the hell is that? But definitely down the line, I do think that it's, particularly if you're looking at, if you're in the gym, it is something that I think it would be important to supplement with.
Yeah, again,
red meat, fish,
yeah.
And it's really cheap as well. I mean, you can get like a 500 grams of creatine for like a fiver.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Like, practically speaking, it's a really well-researched supplement. It's so cheap, and you can just add it to like anything. Like, I know people are like, oh, you shouldn't add it to coffee or whatever, because of interactions and whatever. But like, it doesn't matter. Like, just take it at a time that you can remember to take it. And if you're having a morning coffee, you can just put in 5 grams. You won't even taste it, and it's done. You've sorted yourself out. And like, we know from the research that it does help with all the gym performance stuff. We talked about that previously, and we do Instagram posts and stuff like that. But even as you age, really important for like maintaining that cognition, improving cognition and stuff. So like, it's a no-brainer for me. And if we have a diet that's potentially deficient in this, look, it's definitely a no-brainer.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Then the other only, I'd say the kind of two big ones, like I said, we spent enough, like you said, enough time on iodine in the last one, but kind of calcium and iron will be the next kind of two big ones. Calcium actually can be, pretty easy to get in with a vegan vegetarian diet. I know that there's kind of been studies kind of coming out that are saying vegans have a 50% chance of increased fracture risk, but once it's supplemented, or once they're having adequate calcium levels, that's shown, the difference is shown to be negligible, which is important to note. But we have a lot of fortified drinks now. A lot of the fortified milks are brilliant. They do contain almost the same levels of calcium as your standard milk, which is great. So you can get it in through there. Tofu as well. A lot of tofu is pressed with like a calcium oxalate or whatever. So again, you'd be getting it in through there. Tempeh is the same. So it is possible. I mean, a lot of people would think like spinach, but again, spinach doesn't have great absorption, something called oxalates in it, and which can bind to the calcium, and that reduces its absorption. Things like cooking the spinach beforehand can reduce the oxalate content, which is good. But again, I wouldn't be using spinach as your main source of calcium. But again, practically speaking, you're looking at your tofu, you're looking at fortified milks, and tempeh.
Yeah, I think calcium is one of those ones that, like, it's actually not that hard if you're lucky. If you're literally just going, okay, this is something I need to be concerned with. And then, like you said, like the fortified plant milks and stuff, like they can be really, really beneficial, because like milk is generally the way in the Western world, at least, that we get a lot of our calcium intake from. And obviously there are plant sources of this. Leafy greens, like low oxalate leafy greens, are generally the best bet. Oh, I need to get this from a plant source. But like you said, we have those like calcium set tofu, like that can be really helpful for plant-based dieters. But look, realistically, this shouldn't be an issue if you are looking at it in the diet. And also, you can supplement. Now, supplementing is something I'd probably just talk to like an actual nutritionist or a dietitian or your doctor with. It's not necessarily something that we need to do for everyone, but it's also fairly handy. It's fairly easy to get in the diet if you're looking for it. Again, like those plant-based milks really do help. And then we'll touch on the final one, which is also one that you should talk to your doctor with, which is iron, because this is one of those things that especially relevant for women. You find that, okay, women generally have lower iron levels because, as we talked about in the last episode, and then they switch to a plant-based diet, and now they've taken out potentially all their sources of iron in the diet. Like they already didn't eat a lot of red meat, and now all of a sudden, boom, we've no meat in general. So what's the story here? How are we sorting out that iron?
Yeah, so same sort of thing. If you are supplementing, you want to kind of talk to your doctor first. But getting iron in, you're looking at your pulses, so your beans, your lentils, your chickpeas. Again, leafy green veg, they also still contain your oxalates. So again, we're looking at increasing the absorption there, things like tannins and tea, and decreased absorption. So again, if you're looking at having your pulses or your fortified cereals, not having that with your, try not to have that with your coffee or your tea. Ways that we can increase absorption of iron then is through vitamin C. So if you're having, some lemon or, an orange or something with your meals, that can help increase its absorption as well. So yeah, looking at your nuts, seeds, dried fruit, they all do contain, even though it's minimal, sources of iron, but containing enough of them in the diet is going to be beneficial.
100%. And you do also have different methods in terms of, like, you can cook with iron pans. There's also that thing called an iron fish. They do that a lot in the developing world, where like they have low iron intake. So anytime they're like boiling, whatever food, stews or whatever, they just drop in, which is just basically a block of iron. It's shaped like a fish and stuff. So just put it into the thing. So that slowly releases some of the iron as it's being boiled over time. So that can help with iron intake. Now, as we talked about in the last episode, so we won't belabor the point, like iron intake is something that you should probably just talk to your doctor about. It is something that is more of a nutrient of concern for women. So it is definitely something, if you're feeling tired all the time, or you have any of the symptoms that are related to low iron intake or anemia or anything, it's like, talk to your doctor. They'll be able to give you a plan of action for this, because we have very well thought out plans of action for this that are easy to implement, but it's also not something that everyone needs to be doing, So yeah, everyone needs to get iron in their diet, but not everyone needs to supplement with iron. There's complications with that. So again, it is something that you talk to your doctor about, or at least do a lot of research, your own personal research, that you actually are like, I'm actually capable of doing this research. It's not just reading a blog online, But anyway, is there any other things that you want to say about a plant-based diet? Either practical stuff or even just, theoretical stuff that you're thinking about. Because I know you obviously have eaten a plant-based diet, and also you coach a lot of women that have eaten and are eating a plant-based diet. So is there anything else you think we didn't cover in this podcast that could help?
No, I think it's mostly just asking yourself the questions, should I go vegan? Why do I want to go? First of all, is looking at your why. Is it, health, ethical, environmental? Why is it important to you, and what does it mean to you? And kind of taking it from there. Like, is it realistic for you? And what way do you currently eat? Are you in a position to gradually more go towards this style of eating? Because I think finding out your why is the most important. Is it because you've been, pushed into it from these documentaries saying this is the right thing to do? So understanding that first and foremost, and understanding, like we're saying, you might not be in a position to actually eat that way, and that's okay. Even if you want to be, pushed more towards it for an ethical way, if you're not in a position to, you need to look after your own health first. So I think that's what you need to do first and foremost. And then after that, starting slow, like I was saying already, and focused on being just more plant-based first, and then trying to substitute certain meals with plant-based meats, plant-based meat substitutes, I should say. And then, so that's, you're doing it gradually. You're getting, comfortable with cooking. You're getting comfortable with sourcing these foods. And then you're kind of building up your own recipe book. Because like I said, it's a completely different way of eating than what you've grown up with. So you need to learn this new style. You need to have your new kind of set meals. We all have those meals that we kind of fall back on. So you're trying to kind of build up your cookbook. You're trying to kind of sit down, kind of plan, okay, like where am I going to get my protein from? Like where am I going to get, calcium in? And you don't have to, micromanage it, but just having, a general idea of where you're going to get these things, and then, supplementing if needed.
100%. Gary, do you have anything to say about plant-based diets, or anything that you've had in a practical experience yourself or with clients?
I don't think so. I think we've covered the vast majority of it. I mean, I think that my main concerns with anyone, transitioning to a plant-based diet is, like Nicola alluded to there, the steps that they're going to take along the way. Are they going to jump right in, or are they going to take steps, and do they know what's going to be required to take each of those respective steps? I think the big one for our population is obviously going to be protein intake, because at the best of times when people are eating an omnivorous diet, I still struggle to get some clients to hit their protein targets. The vast majority find it okay, and that depends where they're coming from as a background. And I think that a lot of people who do transition to a plant-based diet, they choose a lot of healthful foods, but they're often very low in protein. So I think that's probably the big one to try to look after. And yeah, just consider long term, like where are you going with this? Do you know the nutrients of concern, and do you know what potential health risks are there? Because obviously, if you're planning to have children, or there's a history of osteoporosis in your family and those types of things, there are certain risks that if you're not looking after the nutrients of concern, you might run into. So that's the primary concern from my perspective. I don't think I have too much else to add.
Fantastic. Well then, wrap us up, Gary. Tell people where they can find us, etc.
Yep. So first things first, if you do need help getting your nutrition in order, or your training and nutrition, we do have coaching spaces available. So the first thing is to check out the information in the description box below. You can look at, all the testimonials from our clients. You might want to look at our social media and stuff first to see if we're, in line with what you'd like. And I think that you would really benefit from following our social media if you're interested in health and fitness broadly, because we've got a very wide selection of content now because of the different members on the team, you know, from nutrition to pain and rehab, musculoskeletal injury, performance-based stuff, health-based stuff. So there's a lot there that you can benefit from. So I recommend that you follow Triage Method on Instagram at the very least. And then, of course, also on YouTube, subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Twitter, follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow us everywhere. Okay, just follow us, and you'll find a wide variety of content. And there's different content on each respective platform, but Instagram is our central hub. So do follow there. And maybe you're not a social media person. Maybe you like getting information dropped into your inbox. And if that's the case, I'd recommend subscribing to the Triage Method newsletter. Again, we drop out content there that doesn't go on our social media. So if you're subscribing there, you're going to be, you know, benefiting once again. And from there, you'll find the links to our social media if you need them. And they're also going to be in the description box below. So other than that, I think that's everything. If you do enjoy the podcast, you're enjoying this series, do be sure to share it, you know, leave a rating and review if you'd like, but sharing it on your story and, you know, sending it to friends, that really helps the word to spread. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of health podcasts these days. So, you know, sharing is one of the ways that we can start to grow our following and spread the good word of Triage.
That's fantastic. Anyway, I have nothing else to say unless you do, Nicola. We'll wrap this up.
No, all good. All good.
Fantastic. Peace out, guys.